Oh, Chuck. A lot to go through in this segment. I'll explain why this video is up on screen. That a lot of people are outraged about the underlying meaning of a video like this one. So let's get into that in a second here. But I have a lot of updates regarding the funding battle. I'm sure you've heard about it. I'll explain if you're sort of missing why are so many Democrats mad at Chuck Schumer. The short version is he's being perceived as bending the knee too easily, too quickly, without a fight to Donald Trump. But the context is that right now, as I'm recording this, at midnight, so sometime during today, there's going to be a vote in the Senate on the funding extension. This is not the big budget with all the tax cuts that we've talked about, but the funding extension for the government for 7 months. And included in this is Congress, Republicans ceding their power to revoke Trump's declaration of a national emergency, which is his justification for tariff policies that otherwise he wouldn't have the power to implement. But you can do it if there's an emergency. So he's falsely claiming that there's a national emergency that justifies it. Democrats don't have a majority in the House or Senate, so they don't have that much power to leverage. But what do they have? In the Senate, you have to vote for cloture that can push past a filibuster, requiring 60 votes to do so. So if that gets passed, if that procedural hurdle is passed, then the actual funding extension can be. And a lot of Democrats are rightly describing Chuck Schumer's call for Democrats to go ahead and allow for cloture, thus allowing for inevitably this funding extension to be passed as ceding ground and conceding too quickly. But let's get into that in a second. What is a more symbolic illustration of the problem? Because it's not just this. I actually sympathize with Schumer's underlying reason, but the outrage is exacerbated by imagery like this. You can't really see right now, but you'll see pop up at the Al Smith dinner. Maybe you could full screen this quickly, Jaden. Chuck Schumer, back during the campaign, and Trump are having a friendly conversation. At one point, you can see here Trump pats him on the back and they're gabbing it up. And it's not just Schumer that we've seen this sort of imagery with that I think connects to the funding battle. You might remember there was a lot of outrage about this video of Barack Obama and Donald Trump at Carter's funeral, where Obama is sort of laughing and chatting with Trump in a way that seems all too friendly, given the contrast in basic dedication to democracy between the two of them. And then you have photos like this, Biden smiling along with Trump whenever Trump came to the White House. I defended the fact that Trump should have been invited because Biden is showing that even in the face of an authoritarian threat, we're not going to be authoritarian to oppose authoritarianism. And so we will still respect the peaceful transfer of power, as horrified as we are that America chose Trump. But we don't need the smile, right? We don't need this sort of a family photo. We're having a good old time. And different examples like this that are anecdotal, they're just a little moment, it's not the biggest deal ever, add to why there's a perception among Democrats, rightfully so, that many of our leaders who are limited in their power right now, but tasked with opposing the outright authoritarianism of Trump's administration, that they're dropping the ball. And we need to continue putting pressure on elected Democrats to have the sort of urgency. And we're seeing it from some of them. Schumer serving as an example perceived by many as not having that urgency. We need an opposition that takes every opportunity to leverage their power against Trump. Now, let me read some reports to give you this specific instance. But the imagery I started with, I think, gives you a sense of the vibe people are feeling, which is you can't be out publicly saying what is true, which is Trump poses an existential threat to our democracy. He's just running roughshod over the basic tenets of our democratic institutions, and also smile and laugh and act like we're back in, whatever, the 90s. Hey, after we vote, we're gonna, how all the old guard people talk like this. We're gonna smoke a cigar after we vote, yes. Then we're gonna go down to the theater and we can see past political lines. I love seeing past political lines. I don't love treating dangerous threats to our democracy as he. Political reports, some Democrats offered some sympathy given the dilemma he and other senators faced. The GOP-written Stopgap cuts some $12 billion in domestic funding while adding money for migrant deportations and some other programs Democrats oppose. It also contains no language that would stop the Trump administration from continuing to hold back congressionally approved spending. But Schumer argued there was no telling what Trump and Musk would do in a shutdown where the White House would have, quote, full authority to deem whole agencies, programs, and personnel non-essential, furloughing staff with no promise they would ever be rehired. So where are we now? Again, right now, it hasn't yet been voted on as of when I'm recording this. Once the full show goes out, probably we'll have an answer. But Schumer came out to say, hey, Democratic senators, I think you should go ahead and vote to keep the government open, which is accepting this Republican resolution. I want to continue to emphasize it's not the big one we've been talking about as it pertains to the broader budget and the cuts they're talking about and the Medicaid gutting that they're talking about to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars. But instead, some of their priorities as a part of a continuing resolution, but then things added to it, and that ceding of power to Trump for 7 months where Congress doesn't have the ability to revoke. But Republicans, they have dedicated themselves to Trump beyond their own even authority in Congress. So that's not a surprise. But given that that's a part of this and they slipped it in, you understand why many in the Democratic base are saying do everything to oppose this and try to yield concessions, as Republicans always try to do during these funding battles, to rein Trump in, force Republicans to rein him in a little bit. Does that sound a little bit like a fairy tale? Maybe. Maybe it does. Maybe there's no chance and Republicans would like to see the government shut down. And that's where I have some sympathy. But the messenger being Schumer and a lot of your sort of, not even just age, but perceived as old guard establishment, Democrats don't seem to have the tone and the messaging that could impact perception, because as we know in politics, perception is reality. Associated Press reporting the Senate approached a key test vote Friday afternoon as lawmakers worked to avoid a partial government shutdown, with Democrats confronting two painful options: allowing passage of a bill they believe gives President Donald Trump vast discretion on spending decisions, or voting no and letting a funding lapse ensue. If that funding lapse does indeed ensue, we're looking at a government shutdown. So that's bad too, because Republicans love the functioning of government being impeded, because that's their whole argument as to why we need to gut it. And so could Democrats risk being blamed for something that plays into the Republican hand? Yeah. And that's why the stakes are so high. And that's why there's so much tension over this. The New York Times reports House Republican leaders on Tuesday quietly moved to shield their members from having to vote on whether to end President Trump's tariffs on Mexico, Canada, and China, tucking language into a procedural measure that effectively removed their chamber's ability to undo the levies. The maneuver was a tacit acknowledgement of how politically toxic the issue had become for the party, and another example of how the all-Republican Congress is ceding its power to the executive branch. In this case, Republican leaders did so using a particularly unusual contortion. They essentially declared the rest of the year one long day, nullifying a law that allows the House and Senate to jointly put an end to a disaster declared by the president. Again, if a lot of this is just blah, 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 to simplify it, Congress, under Republican leadership, as a part of this funding extension that's necessary to keep the government open, has a few of their priorities. Mainly, it's extending funding. But there are some domestic cuts. And they slipped into it, thinking that this is a less controversial moment because it's funding extension, the ceding of their own power to withhold the executive branch ability to do things that they usually at some point get congressional approval to do, because they are fine with Trump having that unilateral control. So let's hear from Schumer then, the one who's getting a lot of the ire of Democrats now, again, being seen as not using every procedural mechanism to oppose the actions of Republicans. And there's a lot of, like I said, dire ire and fire at Schumer.
Ton of leverage. The one thing they have leverage is in the Senate, where you need a filibuster-proof majority on a cloture vote. That there's essentially an unconstitutional assault on the government right now. And I think you would agree with that,
there
right?
Is.
An assault on the constitutional.
These guys are the worst, and we got to fight them every step of the way. As we say in Brooklyn, Chris, every step of the way.
But look, Russ Vought is already telling people, but he's telling people on the floor, we are not even going to listen to this CR. This is a piece of paper that we will impound and rip up the moment it's passed. If that's the case, how is voting for cloture not essentially an imprimatur on the very same assault on the constitutional order.
They're already, even without this CR, they're already doing it.
Right.
Okay? They did it to the Department of Education. But I can tell you, I've been through shutdowns before. It's not that this CR is good. It's not that voting for it is good. It's horrible. But the alternative is worse.
Yeah. Again, I think he struggled to properly articulate that to people, leading to AOC having this criticism.
Chuck Schumer, I guess the Senate Democratic leader, your senator, said at this meeting that he is going to vote for cloture. He is going to vote to allow there to be a simple majority vote. You think that's wrong?
I believe that's a tremendous mistake. Yes.
Why?
I think, well, first and foremost, the American people, if anyone has held a town hall or has seen what has been happening in town halls, American people, whether they are Republicans, independents, Democrats, are up in arms about Elon Musk and the actual gutting of federal agencies across the board. This continuing resolution codifies much of this chaos that Elon Musk is wreaking havoc on the federal government. It codifies many of those changes. It sacrifices and completely eliminates congressional authority in order to review these impulsive Trump tariffs that he's switching on and off. And on top of that, for folks who are concerned about effectiveness in government, this Republican extreme spending bill removes all of the guardrails and all of the accountability measures to ensure that money is being spent in the way that Congress has directed for it to be spent. This turns the federal government into a slush fund for Donald Trump and Elon Musk. It sacrifices congressional authority, and it is deeply partisan. And so to me, it is almost unthinkable why Senate Democrats would vote to hand the few pieces of leverage that we have away for free when we've been sent here to protect Social Security, protect Medicaid, and protect Medicare.
Right. So this was crafted purely by Republicans. You might remember that there was negotiations in the past. It makes sense when you need Democratic votes, or when you need Republican votes when Democrats are in the majority. And then concessions sometimes are made. And Republicans leverage that power, as we've seen every single time, to say that the shutdown's coming, you need to give us stuff. And it's infuriating that we didn't see more of a coordinated effort to extract some concessions in the form of protections for the programs we're seeing targeted. Not even just by this extension is less concerning for the broader protections we need, but it's a moment to leverage it for future protections. And then also, I think if they would have demanded anything, it should have been you have to take out the ceding of congressional power through the writing of this bill, through the text of the bill, on the ability of Congress to hold Trump accountable on his tariff policy. But is it even realistic to expect if they did that, Republicans would actually hold Trump accountable? No, obviously not. Even if that wasn't there, Republicans still wouldn't use the power they then have to hold Trump accountable. And so that's where myself, more than some, to be honest, I'll always be transparent with you, I have more sympathy for Schumer's position than I'm seeing many people articulate. But that doesn't mean I don't feel the same fury that there wasn't like we see from Republicans every time, an effort to at least try to extract more concessions. And the argument from some within the Democratic caucus would be, well, we tried, but they weren't even going to hear us out. But that's where you're seeing the anger, just to sort of fill you in on it, directed towards Schumer. And then we'll see. We don't even know if other senators among the Democratic caucus will go along with Schumer's proclamation. His argument being, this is not me bending the knee, but instead just trying to prevent a shutdown, then many people perceiving it as bending the knee. And I'm sort of angry I didn't see more of a fight, but I also don't want to see a government shutdown. And I know for sure, which is why we started at the top of this segment, with the imagery, with the videos that are really upsetting, with Democrats across the board need to get their act together and to make sure that even when tough decisions come, their messaging, their fight, and their aggressiveness is such that people know the act they end up taking is their best effort at aggressively opposing the anti-democratic authoritarianism and just attacks on basic programs that we're seeing from the Trump administration. Share your thoughts in the comments.